Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and Nintendo just had their Nintendo Direct Switch 2 unveiling. And after watching it, I have three main takeaways that I want to share in this video. And then I also want to talk a little bit about some of the upcoming games that they announced, as well as one really standout online feature that they mentioned was going to be added and how it's going to impact physical collecting. So the first takeaway that I took from the Direct Online was all of the quality of life improvements that a lot of people have talked about when it comes to Nintendo. That being the 120 frames per second availability along with the 60 frames per second, which is definitely going to help with some of those open world 3D adventure games, and is definitely going to help with some of the games that they announced that were going to be coming to the Switch. I feel like they've also done some addition to the Switch remotes that I think are going to have a major impact on interactive games. I think the whole mouse feature that they've added is really cool. It is a really cool feature to add to the Switch remotes. And I think, again, for anyone who's, planning on playing their Switch with like children, having that mouse feature, I think is going to have a major impact. And then just how a lot more detailed the system is with recognizing your motions and your movements. That's huge, especially if you're playing games like tennis games, golf games. I think all of that is going to have a tremendous impact on the quality of life improvement for the console, as well as even playing games like Just Dance, which heavily relies on your hand movements and things like that. I think all of those added features to the Switch remotes are going to help with all of those interactive style games. You obviously, they mentioned the 4K, they mentioned the larger screen, and I think that those are obviously big factors as well. But I think the docking station having that cooling mechanism to optimize performance was also a really cool addition to the Switch 2. So it definitely feels like, from a quality of life perspective, they really concentrated on just adding features to the console itself that made it more accessible, that made it more easy to use. Even something as simple as adding an additional USB-C port on the top as well as on the bottom, that obviously will allow for easier access for charging, but then also allows for add-ons like the camera that they announced will be made available. And speaking of the camera, that leads me into the second takeaway that I took from the Nintendo Direct, which is their commitment to community, right? So they have added a number of features that I feel like takes virtual couch co-op gameplay to a whole new level. Obviously, there have been cameras that have been added to consoles for the longest, but I think the way that they're integrating, Switch chat, your ability to actually have live conversations with people through the actual console, and then having that built-in microphone added into the console is huge. You don't need to have any extra gadgets or widgets. Everything is kind of built into the system, and it's designed to create community, even if it's virtually, right? So I think having that camera feature that you can add on there so that you can actually see people as you're playing the games and then talk to people as you're playing the games. Again, it just takes that whole couch co-op feel to a whole new level virtually. And I think it's really important. We all saw what happened when you're forced to be apart from your loved ones back in 2020. And I think in some ways they kind of future-proof the console from a community perspective. Nintendo has always been ahead of the curve and ahead of the game when it comes to creating that type of community and, connectivity. We really saw that move for them when it came to the Wii. I feel like ever since the release of the Wii, there's always been that commitment to like family and community, and a lot of their design for their consoles has really been centered around that. And I think that's a big part of the reason that they've been able to be leaders in the industry, even with them being, late to the game when it comes to some of the hardware features like the frame rates and the RAM and the speeds and, basically the horsepower of their systems. They've never really been known for their horsepower, but they've always been leaders in connectivity and building community. And so their improvements there and those additional features like Switch chat, the camera. I think all of that is just going to draw more people to wanting to play the Switch, especially non-gamers. I think it's all these features that really draw non-gamers and people who wouldn't traditionally play video games. This is what draws them into the Nintendo ecosystem and makes them more willing to spend money on Nintendo products. So that was another big takeaway for me. The third takeaway for me when it came to the Nintendo Direct was Nintendo's commitment to physical, which I think is really huge in this age of uncertainty when it comes to physical video games and physical collecting. I think Nintendo announcing how they plan to roll out their physical games was big. Obviously, they're going to have their Nintendo Switch 2 games, which will be differentiated by having the red cartridges as opposed to kind of like the dark gray cartridges that you see now. But they also announced that certain games, certain Switch games, or Switch 1, I guess, certain Switch 1 games will be compatible with the Switch 2, which is kind of interesting because, you know, obviously for me as someone who is a big physical Switch collector, that's important, right? So it's going to be important for anyone who's a collector of Switch games to kind of know which games are compatible with the Switch 2 and which games aren't. I'm sure there will be a list that will come out somewhere. And that list is going to be extremely long because, as many of you know, there are literally thousands of Switch games available physically at this point. So it's going to be interesting trying to kind of make sense of what will work and what won't work. But what I think that Nintendo did as well, the third type of physical game, because they have, obviously now there's three types, right? You have Switch 2 games, you have Switch 1 games, but then they announced this third type of physical game, which is basically an enhanced version of a Switch 1 game, right? And they're calling it Switch 2 Edition games. So they're going to start taking some of those games, probably some of the more popular, you know, widely known and widely played AAA titles. These are probably most likely going to be the games that get this Switch 2 Edition treatment. I think they have already announced it for games like Mario Party Jamboree. I believe they also mentioned it for Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And they also mentioned it for, I think, Kirby's Return to Dreamland or Kirby and the Forgotten Land. I can't remember what the third, it was a Kirby game. But the point of the matter is that with these games that were originally released on the first Switch or the Switch 1, these games are now getting basically Switch 2 enhancements in frame rates, enhancements in graphics, and just it's really just meant to improve the overall gameplay experience. How many people will buy into that? I'm not sure, but it's definitely another way for Nintendo to do a quick cash grab for anyone who's just so into the Switch 2 that they want to kind of just get as much stuff that they can for it. I think Nintendo did a really good job with just remaining committed to physical games by providing physical collectors all of these options and different ways to collect for their console. And again, that's very encouraging for someone like me who is a physical game collector. And I got to applaud Nintendo for staying true to that and kind of building confidence in physical collectors. Which leads me, speaking of physical, it leads me to the last two things that I want to talk about, which was their online announcements and then some of the third-party games that they mentioned coming to the console. Speaking of speaking of their online announcements, so they did officially announce, and this is probably something that's been out for some time now, but it was the first time that I heard about it by listening to the Nintendo Direct, but they did officially announce that they are going to be bringing the GameCube to the Nintendo Switch Online service, which is huge. Now, I already know what a lot of people, a lot of physical collectors are going to say. They're going to say Nintendo just destroyed the values of physical GameCube games. And you're going to see a whole bunch of videos talking about how GameCube games are now worthless. They're not worth anything because Nintendo has now brought the GameCube to their Switch Online service. And, you know, the way I look at that is I kind of look at that the same way I look at the NES. The same way I look at the Super Nintendo. Nintendo has been bringing virtual versions of their games to their Switch Online service for years now. And I don't really think that it's had that much of an impact on the value of retro games or any of the retro consoles or games that they've actually brought to their online service. Because anyone who's, it's two different markets. You have the market for collectors and the market for those who play the games. And I think if you're a gamer and you just want to have easy access to those games, then you're going to go ahead and subscribe to that GameCube online service, because it's probably going to be the easiest way for you to access and play your favorite GameCube games. But this has no bearing on collectors. Collectors are still going to collect. Collectors appreciate the physical pieces of software that were released back in their day, whether it be the early 2000s, the mid 90s, or the late 80s. Collectors are going to be collectors, and they're still going to collect regardless of how many consoles that Nintendo decides to bring to their Switch online store. So I am excited as a gamer, because it makes it easier for me to expose my daughter to some of my favorite GameCube, Super Nintendo, and NES games whenever we do play the Switch. And it just makes it easy, right? I don't have to like plug up my GameCube for her to experience these games. She can still experience them in a much easier format, and I can still continue to enjoy collecting these games from my childhood. So I am excited that the GameCube online option was announced, and I think it's really fantastic that they're doing that. There are a number of other online announcements that really didn't stand out to me. That was the one that really grabbed my attention, because I can easily see how physical collectors of GameCube games may react to that. All right, moving on to the last thing that I wanted to talk about were just some of the third-party games that were announced for the Switch 2. And there were a number, right? Obviously, they announced Elden Ring, the Tarnished Edition, that's going to be coming out for the Switch. It's going to be really interesting to see how that runs on that console. With all of the advancements and increases in horsepower, and when it comes to frame rates and 4K and things like that, I'm really interested to see how a game like that will run on the Switch 2. But I'm really excited to see what Hades 2 looks like. Hades, the first one, was really popular back in like 2021-ish, 2020, 2021-ish. That was a really popular game on the Switch, and I know a lot of people really enjoyed that game. Well, they're coming out with part 2, and I think that that's super exciting. If you're a fan of that like isometric hack and slash style gameplay, I think you're going to be excited about that. They also announced Street Fighter 6, which is interesting. And then what looks even more interesting was the announcement of a new Daemon X Machina game. Now, initially when they first started rolling out the preview for that, I honestly thought that it was going to be a sequel to Astral Chain. I got really excited because I thought we were going to get Astral Chain 2. And don't get me wrong, I think Daemon X Machina, that game looks pretty cool, but I definitely would have been more excited if it was Astral Chain 2. You guys let me know down in the comments if you're interested in a sequel for Astral Chain on the Switch 2. I think that that would be pretty awesome, but I might be alone there. They also announced a couple of classic IPs coming to the Switch 2, including Hitman and 007. Now, I was a little confused with the way they announced that, because the way they announced it, it made it seem like Hitman and 007 were teaming up in one game. So I'm not sure if they were saying they're going to be featured in one game together, or if two separate games are being released for the Switch 2, in, being Hitman and 007. So that'll be interesting to see. Also, Bravely Default was mentioned, as well as a new Yakuza 0 game that was mentioned. But the really, really standout title that I think a lot of people were most excited for was the announcement of a sequel to Hyrule Warriors, which is Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. It's being developed by Koei Tecmo in conjunction with Nintendo. And it really just looks like a very modern take on a Dynasty Warriors style hack and slash game with a lot of new and interesting characters, and I'm here for it. I'm all for that type of gameplay style. I think it looks really exciting, and I'm anxious to see what that's going to look like in hand. But overall, I think they did a really good job. I was kind of hating on the Switch 2 at first. I wasn't really too excited about it, but Nintendo just has a really unique way of presenting things and making it seem really exciting. So I'm definitely on board the Switch 2 train at this point, and I'm really interested to see how it goes once it's actually released. Those are my thoughts. Those are my takeaways. Let me know what you thought about the Nintendo Direct Switch 2 announcement and what stood out to you, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.